And the entitlement of our presentation today is, yo, what's going on? What's going on with my young people? And I think this is a very, very important topic for us to consider. I think one of the greatest challenges we face right now in the church is being able to connect with our kids, connect with our youth and our young adults. I tell this story. I was pastoring in a district, and so one Sabbath, after we finished having lunch together, Sabbath dinner, you know how that goes. I see my youth just kind of hanging out, and so as a young pastor, I went to them to try to connect with them, and I started to have a casual conversation and tried to make that turn from a casual conversation to now a spiritual dialogue. You know how that goes, right? And so as we tried to make that turn, and they were with me, and we were talking about how great and amazing God is in comparison to who we are as human beings. And so I tried to use an illustration with them, and I said, for instance, I need you to know Michelangelo is always greater than whatever he creates. And one of the kids in the group, he responds and says, yeah, with his nunchucks and everything. And I just stopped and I looked at the kid like, what are you talking about? Right. And I had to, like, one of those moments you got to like fix your face right instantly, because I just had no idea what he was referring to until it finally dawned on me what he was talking about. You see, he was talking about, well, let me say, I was talking about Michelangelo, the artist, right? The ones who made artistry in the great cathedrals. But this young child, when he heard the name Michelangelo, he processed it as the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle named Michelangelo. And that mutant ninja has nunchucks, I guess. And so as I'm referring to an artist, he is hearing me and processing it as a ninja turtle, right? And isn't it amazing how we can be using the same words to our young people, hear me today, but it will communicate very different messages depending on your generation. I see somebody in the chat, Sister Nicole. Yes, the TMNT, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, right? So I'm using the same verbiage that around the same demographic is going to have a very different reception than it does in this demographic. And the truth is that we often expect this younger generation to understand us, but the work of the gospel is to transform ourselves to meet the needs of those we are trying to reach. You can't expect them to figure out your world. That's not how this thing works. You have to figure out, how do I enter their world? All right. So here it is. Today, we're going to do a deep dive on Gen Z and millennials. We're going to talk about 4 different areas as it pertains to Gen Z and millennials. All right. Number 1, we're going to talk about values. Okay. The difference in value system between the generations. It's very, very important. Secondly, we're going to talk about relationship building. How do we build relationships with this generation? Thirdly, we're going to talk about listening. What does it really mean to listen? And lastly, we will try to land the plane with counseling versus coaching. Listen, one of the questions I want to ask us today is this: who are Gen Z and millennials? Or better yet, what is the age demographic when we refer to Gen Z and millennials? What ages are we talking about? Here's why this is important, y'all. Though others may not know, our generations are very aware of which which group they are in. Like, millennials don't want to be referred to as Gen Z. Gen Z doesn't want to be referred to as millennials. It may seem small, but like, the other thing that's important with this is that we'll have people maybe from a public platform, from a pulpit, or making public announcement, and they'll be like, oh, all these millennials, and really they're talking about Gen Z, and we don't understand who millennials are. So Thomas, you are correct, man. Millennials are from about 1981 to 95 or 96, somewhere in there is where sociologists make the cutoff for millennials. And then thereafter, and I think this is Gladys, you are correct. From about 20, now they're about 24, 25. That is Gen Z now. And somebody said I'm from the baby boomers, right? That is Gen Z, and on down to about 8, it is Generation Z. Very, very important for us, because when we're talking about youth ministry, we're not referring to millennials anymore. I need us to understand millennials are anywhere from like 26 up to their 40s, early 40s age. So millennials are young adults, and some even beyond young adults to mid adults. Young millennials are already in the workforce. Millennials have kids, and actually have kids who are in middle school and maybe even high school, some even in college. Millennials are already very, very established in their lives in many different respects. Just from a generational standpoint, what we're talking about really primarily now is Gen Z as youth and as young adults. Okay, so I just want to make that clear so that when we're referring to the generations, we know what we're talking about. And here's the other thing that's important. When we talk about 3 key values, one of my professors said it this way: millennials and Gen Z have the same value system, but Generation Z is just on steroids. So one of the first values for these generations is the value of community. Hear me on this. They desire connection with real people. And when we look at that, it's easy for us to then surmise and say, well, they already have community, because as you see there in the images, they are connected through their phones. So you have all of these platforms that are given titles of being social, right? Social media, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, all these different mediums that are supposed to help you stay connected. But one of the ironies of these generations is that though they have the most digital connection, they are the least connected generations of all time. And one of the things that you'll see with these generations is they lack real people skills. We call that soft skills. So it's interesting that if you were to put a bunch of Gen Zers in a room, it's likely that all of them will just kind of start getting on their phones and not really talking to each other, versus like the boomer generation, when you got young people together, that's all they would do is just sit and talk together, because they didn't have maybe access to those same devices. And so though they are in the same physical space, they don't have as great an understanding of how to connect with people. This is shown up majorly in the workforce, because when millennials hit the workforce, everybody was like, what's wrong with these kids who I'm hiring, and they don't know how to have conversation, they don't know how to send out emails and communicate, they don't know how to do customer service, because they lacked the people skills, because they don't have real connection with real people. So much of it is virtual that it has then in some way stunted the growth for many of them in being able to have real dialogue and connection with people. So hear me on the irony here. They want real connection, but they keep getting it through an artificial platform. Whew. They're wanting to have depth and like conversation, but all they're getting is tweets and reposts and likes, but that's not real connection. They are chasing after affirmation and reconnection with people, but all they're getting is likes and shares, and that's not really meeting the need. And so they continue to dive deeper into these platforms, hoping that they'll be able to get community, but they're not getting it. Y'all with me? So then hear me, like for my boomers, for my older millennials, right? It seems like there is a clear-cut solution to this, which is, well, perfect. If you want community, that must mean you want church. Because that's what the church is, right? It's a community of believers. But I need you to hear me. From the millennial and Gen Z perspective, the church does not equal community, it equals an institution. again, I'm not trying to like pick on generations, but for the boomer generation, since I got some of you all here, right? The boomer generation had a general trust of institutions, right? When we could see that, that's why you would see on branding established in a certain year, because the thinking was, oh, if you have been around this long, that must mean you are a trustworthy organization. Millennials and Gen Z flip that paradigm on its head, and they perceive institutions and longevity by asking the question, if you've been around this long, how many bodies do you have buried in order to stay around this long as an organization? You hear the difference in the thinking? That's why we had movements like the Me Too movement, where all of these corporations, all of these powerful people were brought to their knees. Why? Because millennials and Gen Zs were like, nah, we're digging up all the dirt. We're finding all of the buried bodies. We're finding all of the scandals and everything that you all have been hiding as organizations to be able to stay around this long. And so here it is. There is a general mistrust of the church because of how long we've been around. Right. So the way to millennials and Gen Z is not to try to say, well, the church is just trustworthy just because it's been around for X amount of years and we've been here and we have this reputation. That does not matter to them at all. All right. What's going to actually matter to them is that they begin to see the church as a place of real community. I believe small groups are a tremendous blessing and vehicle as a way to be able to present the church as a source of community, not as an institution, but just as a body of people and believers who love one another. Second value, and I got to move faster, man. I feel like I'm speed racing through this, but that's what happens when we lose time on the front end. Authenticity. So young people have this like spidey sense where they can tell if you're not being who God created you to be. I remember a pastor who used to show up, and this dude was like middle age, and he would come to the youth ministry events, and he would always be trying to be wearing like a basketball jersey and trying to use the verbiage and lingo he would hear us as the young people using. And it always came across as disingenuous every single time, because we knew that's not really who you are. You are trying to put on a facade in order to be who you think we want you to be, when we just want you to be yourself. For my youth ministry leaders, I need you to know, like, the way that God has equipped you, that's who you need to be. You don't need to try to use their wording and all of their slang, right? They know that's not, you don't say, let's set tea. They know you don't say that, right? They know that you don't refer to certain things in that particular way. They just know, because it doesn't even sound natural coming from your lips. So let me say this. I think that we can have an awareness of what's going on and the slang that they're using. That's fine, but still just be yourself. One of my favorite leadership gurus, Craig Groeschel, he says it this way: people would rather follow a leader who's always real than one who's always right. Need somebody to receive that today. As their youth ministry leader, whether you're Pathfinders, whether you're AY, whatever lane you may be in, they would rather know that you are a real and authentic source and just who God created you to be. I need you to know that you can fight in your own armor, so that if you have a particular interest, you can introduce that interest to your young people and they will be receptive. It may not be exactly what they expected, right? I know of a guy who was interested in cars. So what did he do with his youth? Help them learn how to work on cars. You can teach them values. You can teach them discipleship all through the different vehicles that God has equipped you with. You don't need to be anybody else. They value authenticity. And thirdly, watch this, they value spirituality. Now, I know as soon as I said that, there are some of my youth ministry leaders right now who are like, if they value spirituality, how come I haven't seen them? I haven't seen them at church. How come I haven't seen them at AY? But listen, this is what sociologists have said. They have said that these two generations, millennials and Gen Z, are the most spiritually open generations of all time. I need somebody to let that marinate right now. the most spiritually open generations of all time. Now, here is where we misinterpret that phrase. Hear me. This is where we misinterpret that phrase. We say, oh, if they are open to spirituality, that must mean that they believe in Christianity. It's not the same thing. They are open to all forms of spirituality, not one lane, which happens to be Christianity, or an even narrower lane, which happens to be Seventh-day Adventism. Previous generations had a stiff arm that they would give to Buddhism and to Hinduism and to the Nation of Islam and to these other religions, right? But I need you to know that these generations, millennials and Gen Z, will listen to everybody. They're cool with, hey, so what do you believe over here? That when you look at the things and the entertainment that they watch, right, they don't have a fear of demons or a fear of witchcraft or a fear of that's spirituality, right? It's just the other side of spirituality is the dark forces, but they're not necessarily turned off by that or afraid of that. They're not just all like scared of a Ouija board and all these. They're open to exploring all forms of spirituality. And so here's where I believe we are losing some of our young people. Okay. I believe we are losing some of our young people because we say this is the truth, and they say that is a truth. They have a receptivity to relative truth. You'll hear them use this phrase, that's your truth. That's not my truth. What they're saying is that's your perspective on it, but I hold a different perspective. And what we tend to do as a church is we try to say everybody needs to have this uniform perspective, right? Because this comes from the Bible. But if you are saying, I'm not just open to the Bible, I'm open to other canons, I'm open to other forms of spiritual sources, right? So I'm not looking at the Bible exclusively. They won't necessarily say the Bible is wrong. They say, well, I've also listened to what's in the Quran. I've also explored what's over here, right? We have to be careful of trying to force feed them our perspective. What I believe is going to be a more effective approach is to allow our truth to become their truth. You can simply share what God, hear me on this, so important. You can share what God has done for you, your testimony, right? Why you believe it, but you don't have to push it on them to say you need to believe it as well. Just simply keep sharing and testifying of the goodness of the Lord in your own life and allow them to begin to explore what they are searching for and continue to be a consistent support for them so that as they are on a spiritual journey, they can come to the conclusion on their own. The bottom line is like, they don't want you to tell them what to believe. Let them begin to kind of explore what do other religions believe and then process through with them. Okay, so if that's what they believe, but this is what the church believes, well, does that really align? Can you believe this and that, right? Or do these two truths conflict? How does it make you feel when you are told by Catholicism that you need to keep doing things to earn salvation? How does that make you feel? Help them process through them, ask questions, allow them to teach you, but you've got to have a level of openness. Secondly, I want to talk about relationship building and how it is. Now, I got like 20 minutes. Okay, I don't know how I'm gonna do this, but I'm gonna try to go through this as quickly as possible, and then we'll try to get to these last two portions, okay? Relationship building, 7 P's of relationship building. Number 1, if you wanna build relationship with your young people, you gotta start with prayer, okay? The Bible says that God is love, which means our relationships must begin with him. Secondly, you have to have patience. And here's where, I mean, especially in youth ministry, patience is so essential because it can be easy to think that you're waiting on people to get the message, but really you are simply waiting on God to help them process through where they need to be. Whew. In other words, you're not waiting on them to show up at AY. You're waiting on God to bring them to AY. 2 different things. And it helps, I believe, if you understand and adopt the perspective that I'm waiting on God, not on people. Thirdly, you've got to keep a right perspective. You have to learn in youth ministry how to celebrate the small wins because they become major victories. I just celebrate when I see my young people simply sitting in a pew. That's a win. I celebrate when I'm able to have a conversation with my young people and just say, hey, how's school going? That's a win. I'm able to celebrate when a young person just texts me and checks on me or they ask for some help. That's a win, right? If you are looking for the major outcomes all the time and like these huge mountaintop experiences, I need you to know those are few and far between. But if you can celebrate the small wins, the simple progress with your young people, you can get to the major victories. Y'all hear me today? Fourthly, I want to talk about how to be practical. You have to be practical with your young people, which means you meet them where they are and how they want to communicate. Many of them are not going to want to communicate by calls. They're just not. I'm sorry, I know. But again, we're adopting the mentality of Paul that we've got to become all things to all people. A lot of them don't want you to call them. They would much rather you send them a text message. They're not, if you're trying to reach a millennial, they're not going to want you to show up at their home. Like, pastors like do visitation. Pastors have to adjust in their visitation. People don't want you up in their personal spaces like that. So what do? You meet them at like Panera or Starbucks at a neutral location and you connect with them one-on-one there. You figure out how they want to communicate and you adopt those means, okay? Personalization. I need somebody to hear this. You've got to courageously move beyond the group thread and get to know them one-on-one. I just need like 5 amens on that, okay? Because it is easy to get into the routine of sending out group text messages. Get everybody on WhatsApp. Get everybody on whatever, just a simple text thread, and I'm just sending everything out. But they need to know that you care about them personally, individually. Y'all hear me? Sixth thing I need us to have is perception. You've got to not only listen to what your young people say, but what they are not telling you. Ooh. There's a whole different depth of message that is being transmitted when you are listening, not just to what they're saying, what they are not saying. So when you ask them, how's school going? They're like, it's okay. What they just said is, I'm not enjoying school. So you could just simply gloss over that and say, oh, okay, yeah, school is great. Or you could hear what they didn't say, which is, I'm struggling in school. And we can miss a lot of verbal cues and indications with our young people if we are not having the perception to listen to what they are not saying. And finally, you've got to have persistence. Youth ministry is not for the faint of heart. I wish I had a witness today. It is not for those who are in it for applause, who are in it for thank yous, but you've got to have persistence to keep on going and learn to not give up. Like, to build relationship with young people, you have to learn to listen. It's just essential, okay? Which goes to what I was saying about hearing what they're not saying. Simon Sinek says there's a difference between listening and waiting your turn to speak. How many of us can testify that we have been guilty of not truly listening, but simply thinking in our own minds what we're about to say next? And, ooh, they didn't even address this point, and wait till I catch them with this punchline, right? And we start to get caught up in what our response is going to be, and we then miss what the person is actually saying to us. This happens with our young people, y'all, that they are talking to us, but we are not intentionally listening to them, and so they can feel it and they begin to tune out what you are saying to them because you're not really listening to what they're saying. So the distinction between hearing and listening: hearing requires sound waves, but listening means that you have gone beyond what they have actually said and you are interpreting to understand what they just said. So sometimes with my wife, I'm gonna be honest here, in this virtual sanctuary, we're gonna create this as a virtual sanctuary, and I'm gonna just confess it in the house of the Lord today, that with my own wife, amen, there'll be times that she is talking to me, right? My wife, Janelle, she's talking to me, and I just happen to look at my phone. I get distracted by the game. I'm looking elsewhere or thinking about something else. And she will ask me, are you listening to anything I'm saying right now? Watch this. And what I will respond is, yeah, I'm hearing you, right? And she's like, well, what am I saying? And I will repeat back to her verbatim the words that she just said to me. And in my mind, y'all, there's like this smile that just comes across my face, right? Because I'm like, yo, I got it. You didn't think I was actually hearing what you said. And she will say to me, no, that's repeating back to me what I said, but that doesn't mean you actually understood it. Whew. In other words, when you actually have an understanding of it, what you will do is not just repeat back verbatim what the person said, but you are going to do an interpretive work and then process it and put it into your own words so that when you say it back to them, it indicates to the speaker that you have actually done the hard work of not just hearing the sound waves, but listening to what they're saying. And what I'm saying to our youth ministry leaders today is that you cannot simply hear the sound waves that are coming from our young people. Hear me. You cannot just simply interpret what they are maybe complaining about as sound waves to be dismissed. You cannot just simply hear what they're talking about in their dating lives and how difficult it is and just interpret that as sound waves. But I need us to get to the place where we actually are processing and understanding what they are saying. It requires more work. It requires you to ask follow-up questions. It requires you to actually listen. And here's some things, and here's what I wanted to ask you to do in this moment, right? I've put here some different requirements for listening. And I want you to just openly confess here into the chat. Which one of these is the most difficult for you to do in regard to listening? Which one do you struggle with? And you can even put why. So when it comes to listening, I need you to know it's active, not passive. Okay. Your brain is actively engaged. Is that difficult for you? Listening means you're giving appropriate feedback and response as the person is dialoguing with you. Listening means you are minimizing distractions. Y'all heard me say that's the hard one for me, like to be fully engaged and not be looking at my phone. Listening means that you are pursuing understanding and asking reflective questions. I see a lot of people saying right now the non-verbal cues. That is a difficult one, right? That you are watching their body language and really seeing how this is impacting them and having a level of empathy to connect with how they're feeling, that you are patiently processing and you are not focusing on response, but you are actually like where they are. And then lastly, that you are providing validation. Validation means that this is so important for our young people, that you are saying, I can understand how you could feel that way. It's very difficult for us to try to do because our responses are often trying to tell them how they should feel about it. But validation means that you are saying it's okay to feel how you're feeling. Whew. I hope somebody's taking notes today. Validation means it's okay to not have a high level of trust with the church. That's okay to feel that way. To not want to like trust everybody. That's okay. It's all right to be skeptical about like what the pastor's saying and you want to verify everything in the word of God. It's okay, right? It's important to give people the validation that they're not crazy for feeling how they're feeling. Deeper listening. Two things I want to encourage you to adopt as you are going deeper in your listening skills. One is reflective listening, which means that you rephrase. That's what I was talking about earlier with my wife. You rephrase what you heard the person say and then ask if you are understanding them. And that tells the person, I'm intentionally listening. And even if what you are rephrasing and saying is not correct, it gives them the opportunity now to evaluate, oh, maybe I didn't communicate this properly. So let me try to rephrase what I'm saying so that you can properly understand. It makes sure that there is a proper communication channel. And then lastly, empathetic listening. So exercising empathy. So make statements that convey you feel what they are feeling. When I tell you, this can open so many doors for you and your young people. When they see that you are emotionally intelligent enough to feel what they are feeling, it will help them to connect with you on a whole different level. Okay? So using the feeling statements are a big deal with our young people. What I need you to do is answer this question in the chat. Are you a counselor or a coach? As a youth ministry leader, right? AY leader, Pathfinder leader, whatever your title may be in the church, are you a coach or a counselor? Or are you both? Here it is. I need us to know that by and large, the majority of us here as youth ministry leaders, even including myself, we are coaches, not counselors. And I know that you may have had a different perception of what I meant by counselor. A counselor is a trained professional, and a coach is essentially a mentor. Vital difference for us to understand. I want us to have a right perspective of the profession of counseling, right? Because even though some of us may not have even termed ourselves a counselor, what I'm trying to caution us away from is trying to do the work of a trained professional as a counselor, when really what our scope is to be a coach. When we say counselor or a therapist, or, I know if I use the word therapist, many of us would have like shied away from it. But just again, a counselor has had 7 to 15 years of post high school training to become a counselor. They have most likely become at a bachelor's degree, a master's, or even a doctoral degree, studied psychology, completed clinical hours. And here it is. This is the critical point. Counselors are trained to help people overcome problems, right? Whether that's emotional trauma, family and marital dynamics, painful experiences, substance abuse, addiction, and mental illness. And thirdly, a counselor has a client to patient relationship, which is legally binding, that gives privacy to the patient. Being a coach, some even like you hear this terminology, life coaches, but really we're using it in the sense of a mentor. It does not require a degree. There are some life coaches who can be certified, but there is not a uniform, clearly defined educational track, even for being a life coach. Okay. But secondly, and here's where I want to focus in, a life coach or a mentor helps people achieve goals and outcomes. So they help people clarify life goals, create a vision board, inspire dreaming, generate a motivation, and develop a plan, problem solve. Those are the responsibilities of a coach. And it is not a client to patient relationship. It is a collegial relationship that is less binding. And here's why this is important, right? Is this point number 2 in the scope of what we can actually reasonably handle. I need us to know that even for me as a pastor who is almost done acquiring an MDiv, I am not a counselor. I am a coach. I am there to help people achieve goals and outcomes. I can help you do some level of problem solving, but by and large, I am not properly equipped to deal with your emotional trauma or your family and marital dynamics to the deepest levels, or your painful experiences in substance abuse and addiction. I have to be mindful, hear me, of the depth of problems that I'm able to handle. And if it's beyond my depth, my responsibility is to refer. Both counselors and coaches help people, but the problems they are qualified to deal with are different. And the reason I'm including this in this presentation is because our church is running into a major problem where you have people who are trying to deal with problems they're not qualified to deal with. So you'll have youth ministry leaders telling young people, this is what you need to do to deal and overcome with an addiction. And when it doesn't work or it worsens the problem, what it opens us up to is a lawsuit because you are now operating outside of your depth. And so it's important for you as a youth ministry leader to know that your young people are going to come to you with problems. You can listen to them. You can validate them. You can say, man, that is really, really difficult. And you can ask them, who have you talked to about this? And are you going to get the appropriate help for this? But I need us to not try to take it on ourselves, that we've got to be the ones to try to fix everybody's problems. Y'all hear me today? It is not only a legal matter, I believe it's even spiritual. You can do more damage to people when you are trying to deal with stuff that you know how to really deal with it. You can do long-term damage. I can do long-term damage to somebody if I'm trying to handle something I don't know how to handle it. Okay. So I believe it's important for you, hear me, to have a conversation with your pastor, right? As the AY Pathfinder Adventurer, whatever level of leadership you are at right now, have a conversation with your pastor and ask them, Pastor, what do we have a list of counselors to refer our people to? Can I get access to that list? If not, can we create a list of people in our area, trusted professionals who we can refer people to, and we can tell parents to go there. We can encourage young people to go to their school counselors. We can encourage people to talk to medical professionals, even for some of these various things that they are bringing to us, so that we're not taking it on ourselves, but at the same time, we are helping to assist them get the help that they need. All right. Listen, the greatest help you can be to someone else is knowing your limitations. I want to share with you this other major piece of news in case you didn't see it on Shift yesterday. The Beta United Youth Congress is postponed to 2025, or you can view it and say in this year of 2023, it is canceled. Okay. And so we were planning to push our resources that direction, but this is a recent change that has taken place. And in light of that, we are trying to develop some alternative plans for our young people here within Central States. So I'm not at a place and point yet because this affects scheduling and calendar, it affects budgeting, it affects a whole lot of different moving pieces. I want to let you know, as soon as we do have our redefined plan solidified, I will be sending that out to you all. We're going to continue with our youth ministry meetings where we're coming together and we're able to do training and development and keep you all abreast of what's going on. But I want to encourage you to keep doing fundraising. All right. Keep doing fundraising because it's going to be needed for this year, but it's also going to be essential for 2024 because the International Pathfinder Camporee is coming up, and that's going to be in Gillette, Wyoming. So where it used to be in Oshkosh, it's now in Gillette, Wyoming, but that's coming up in 2024. And then in 2025, the Beta United Youth Congress is coming up. So there will be a need for funds this year, 2024, 2025. And I believe that if we can get our young people invested by having them be actively engaged in fundraising, it helps them to also have a greater appreciation for whatever's being done. So continue to do fundraising, continue to talk to the church, right? And again, as plans are forthcoming for federations, for a possible youth summit, for anything summer camp oriented, we will be sharing that as soon as we have those plans solidified. So I know there may be questions. I know people are building their calendars. I don't want you to think that everything is just not been planned out. It was, it's just plans are changing. All right. Tish, you asked for a date. Did I mention a date? Somebody can help me. Or Tish, if you can clarify, what date are you asking about? You can unmute. Oh, for 2025. No, the date is not set for 2025, but the event, Beta United Youth Congress, I'm saying, has been rescheduled for the year of 2025. So I don't have a date yet in 2025 for that, but I'm letting you know that's when it's been moved to. Thank you.